Today we'll talk about wisdom of crowds and madness of crowds. Not all crowds generate wisdom. They sometimes create pure madness. Under what conditions do crowds generate wisdom? And under what conditions do crowds generate madness? Let's start with collective wisdom. We will then discuss why sensible, well educated, highly intellectual people sometimes behave badly and madly when they are surrounded by other people. The argument for the wisdom of crowds can be traced back to an article published in Nature at the beginning of the 20th century. The title of the article is Vox Populi, which is the Latin term voice of people. The article was written by Francis Galton. You're probably familiar with him as you read literature on statistics, psychology, and sociology. He published over 340 papers and books. He created the statistical concept of correlation. He introduced the use of questionnaires and surveys to collect data in social sciences. He was also the founding father of psychometrics, which is the science of measuring mental faculties. He was Charles Darwin's half cousin, sharing the same grandfather. In the article of Vox Populi, Galton described a way judging competition at a county fair in England. An ox was selected, and people wrote down on a card their estimate of what the ox would weigh. Those who guessed most successfully received prizes. Galton didn't carry out that competition. He just happened to be there, talking about the right person, the right place, and the right time. Galton thought average people would be terrible at guessing the weight of an ox. Butchers and farmers were experts in judging the weight of an ox. But what did other people know about the weight of an ox? Galton was kindly allowed to examine about 800 guesses people wrote down. After excluding 13 cards because of being defective or illegible, Galton calculated the average of everyone's guesses. The crowd collectively got it right. The difference between the actual weight of an ox and the average of the crowd's guesses was within 1 pound. This got Galton to think that if the average competitors at the county fair can collectively make a good judgment on the weight of the ox, then an average voter is of judging merits of most political issues on which he votes. Galton wrote, according to the democratic principle of one vote, one value. The middlemost estimate expressed the vox populi, every other estimate being condemned too low or too high by a majority of the voters. So Galton argued for a majority rule as they represent the voice of people. But more than 40 years before Francis Galton's published article on Vox Populi in Nature, Charles Mackay published a book titled Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. The book was an early study of crowd psychology. Mackay presented a wide range of examples of the madness of crowds, including crusades, duels, economic bubbles, fortune telling, and the influence of politics and religion on the shapes of beards and hair. So, which one is it? Do crowds generate collective wisdom or do crowds create madness? The answer is yes. Crowds can go either way, it all depends. The next question is what conditions need to be met for crowds to generate collective wisdom? Under what conditions do crowds make wise decisions? We are studying social network analysis, so how to use network science to answer those questions. In our first class of the course, Social Network Analysis, I introduced the concept of emergence. Emergence occurs when an entity has new properties that cannot be explained by the properties of its parts, because the new properties don't exist previously at a micro level. The new properties emerge only when the parts interact. Examples of emergence are everywhere. The properties of water emerges from the combination of hydrogen and oxygen atoms. There are properties of hydrogen and oxygen atoms, but they cannot be used to explain the properties of water. The new properties of water are irreducible and are more than the sum of its parts. Likewise, you cannot reduce traffic patterns to individual cars because the traffic patterns are more than the sum of its parts. Network science can help explain how the behavior of each node in the network can collectively emerge into collective behavior that is completely different from individual behavior. When we study network behavior, which is collective behavior, we cannot simply sum up individual behavior. In networks, nodes make up a network, but once the nodes join the network has a life of its own. The nodes interact with each other. Through those interactions, collective behavior emerges. More importantly, the collective behavior is different from individual behavior. You are likely to behave differently when you are alone from when you are in groups. This is called emergence. Another example of emergence is your conscious thought at any given moment. Your thought emerges from neurons in your brain. The neurons have its own metabolism and functions, but they cannot be used to explain how your thought emerges exactly. Your thoughts, particularly the creative ones, cannot be predicted by calculating the activities of neurons. If you look broader, you'll see in social settings, each individual has his or her own thoughts and opinions. But the characteristics of multiple brains, along with their thoughts and opinions, are not sufficient to explain group decision and collective human behavior in crowds. Individual wisdom does not translate into the wisdom of crowds automatically. It is wrong to assume that if you put multiple experts in a room and they can collectively make a wise decision. Since behavior is an outward manifestation of decision, let's look at what it takes for a group to make a decision. To make a decision collectively, there are three key components. They are multiple individuals, a choice set from which each individual chooses from, and procedures and rules of aggregating individual preferences to a group decision. Using network science to study collective decision, you first consider multiple individuals as nodes. You need to have at least two nodes, otherwise it's individual decision making. I created illustrations of two groups, A and B. The color of nodes represents views and preferences of each group member. The more colors in the network, the more diverse the views and preferences are. Which group do you think has the potential to make better decisions? The correct answer is Group B. Why? Different views and preferences in Group B indicate the group's choice set is much larger than that of Group A. After all, if every group member holds the same view, why do we need multiple people? For the efficiency of decision making, one individual can make the decision in Group A. There is no need for Group A to come together to make a decision. It's a waste of all group members' time. I'd like to point out that diversity here means diverse views and preferences. It does not necessarily mean skin color, gender, race, or other social characterizations. You can have people from diverse groups, but they all share a dominant social identity, such as one political party, and hold the same view. It is the diverse views and expertise about the issue at discussion that improve decision quality. Abraham Lincoln once said, "A cabinet which should agree at once on every such question would be no better or safer than one counselor." What you see on the screen is the painting of first reading of the Emancipation Proclamation by President Lincoln. Francis Carpenter spent 6 months in the White House to create this painting. The painting shows Lincoln, the first Republican president, presented the Emancipation Proclamation to his cabinet on July 22, 1862. The setting of the painting is Lincoln's office. It is now known as the Lincoln Bedroom. Lincoln told Carpenter each cabinet member's position in the room on the day of the first reading of the Emancipation Proclamation. Carpenter said there were 2 elements in the cabinet, the radical and the conservative. Mr. Lincoln was placed at the head of the official table between the 2 groups, nearest that representing the radical, but Lincoln was the uniting point of both. On the left, there was Edwin Stanton, Secretary of War. When Lincoln and Stanton first met, Stanton was already a prominent lawyer and he treated Lincoln with contempt. But Stanton later developed deep respect for Lincoln and was unable to control his tears for weeks after Lincoln's death. Standing between Stanton and Lincoln was Salmon Chase, Secretary of the Treasury. Chase had very strong desire to be the President of the United States. He campaigned for the Republican nomination for president in the 1860 presidential election, but the party chose Lincoln at its national convention. Sitting next to Lincoln was Gideon Welles, Secretary of the Navy. Welles met Lincoln 2 months before the national convention, and Welles planned to vote for Chase. Standing next to Welles was Caleb Smith, Secretary of the Interior. Smith was considered a more compelling public speaker than Lincoln. It was said that Smith could make you feel the blood tingling through your veins to your finger ends and all the way up your spine. At the 1860 Republican Convention, Smith helped swing the Indiana delegation to Lincoln, a move that would lay the foundation for Lincoln's presidential nomination. Next was William Seward, Secretary of State. In the painting, Lincoln was intently considering the views presented by Seward. Seward was regarded as the leading candidate for the Republican nomination in the 1860 presidential election. After Lincoln winning the party nomination, Seward appreciated Lincoln's talents, and he later became Lincoln's closest friend and advisor in the administration. There was Montgomery Blair, U.S. Postmaster General. Blair had already achieved national fame when he represented the slave Dred Scott before the U.S. Supreme Court. On the right, there was Edward Bates, U.S. Attorney General. Bates initially thought Lincoln was incompetent, but eventually concluded that Lincoln was an unmatched leader, very near being a perfect man. After winning the presidency, Lincoln invited his political rivals into his cabinet. Every cabinet member was better known, better educated, and more experienced in public life than Lincoln. Not many leaders are as self-confident as Lincoln, and not many leaders appreciate the merits of diverse views so much that they are willing to manage the downsides of diverse views. It took Lincoln 7 months to assemble the cabinet. He was under intense pressure from all sides, but Lincoln decided to surround himself with the strongest men from every fraction of new Republican Party. Former Whigs, Free Soilers, and anti-slavery Democrats. As Lincoln was assembling his cabinet, it was pointed out that the inclusion of Chase, Wells, and Blair in the cabinet, along with Seward, Bates, and Smith, would give the Democrats a majority. They outnumbered the Whigs, who made up the major portion of the Republican Party. Lincoln replied, "You seem to forget that I expect to be there, and counting me as one. You see how nicely the cabinet would be balanced and ballasted." Maybe this is one more reason that Lincoln proved his greatness. If diverse views and preferences are so instrumental, then why don't people choose diverse group members to make collective decisions? Jennifer Eberhardt wrote in her book, Biased: Uncovering the Hidden Prejudice That Shapes What We See, Think, and Do. With diversity, we have growing pains, privilege shifts, roles change, new voices emerge. Diverse groups of people are not always the happiest group of people. Lincoln's cabinet was never short of bickering and jealousy. Moreover, it takes more time to make a collective decision as people argue for and against options in a choice set. It is much more efficient to make a decision when you have everyone agrees with you. As we ensure diverse views in the group, we also need to be aware of equality bias. It refers to people's tendency to weigh people's opinions equally, regardless of their expertise and competence. When group members have similar expertise and competence, the equality bias provides an efficient decision-making strategy by lowering decision-makers' cognitive load and reducing disharmony within the group. However, when sampling, tallying, and eliciting opinions and collecting data, we need to be cautious. We must assess the likelihood that people's opinions are interdependent and biased, and consider whether their opinions should be weighed equally. In some cases, the crowd does generate wisdom, but it is also common for wisdom to be held by a minority. To generate wisdom of the crowd, it is recommended to employ the select crowd strategy, selecting the crowd by their expertise, skills, and knowledge, and then averaging their opinions, instead of assigning equal weight to all members. If we assign the same weight to the views from both experts and non-experts, we fail to leverage on the expertise in the group. We've discussed the first two components of collective decision-making. They are multiple individuals and a choice set from which each individual chooses from. Now let's talk about the third component, procedures and rules of aggregating individual preferences to a group decision. We've all been involved in a decision where we are unclear of our role in the collective decision-making process. Then, when the decision is made, we might feel frustrated or unvalued. Even when the rules and procedures are in place, they can go wrong in so many ways. I provide some examples here. The first thing to consider is unanimity or majority, the rule of whether a group take a unanimous vote or a majority vote can make a difference in decision outcomes. To find out what differences a majority rule or a unanimous rule can make, Charles Miller conducted an experiment. He recruited 80 groups of people. Each group had 3 people. Each group made 3 decisions involving selecting an option out of a choice set. All options were arranged along a spectrum. Half of the group made decisions by a majority rule, and half by a unanimity rule. Each of the three members held a different position, with two group members, that is, member 1 and member 2, holding positions relatively close together on the spectrum of options. The third group member held a position farther from the other two. For groups under each decision rule, half of the members were informed of one another's preferences for the options, known as complete information condition, and the other half of the members had no idea what other group members' preferences were, known as no information condition. How did a unanimous vote or a majority vote can make a difference in collective decision outcomes? If you don't know your group members' choices, there is no significant difference in decisions under a majority rule and a unanimity rule. The green arrow shows the average group decision at about 6.2 on the option spectrum. But if you are informed of other group members' choices, under the majority rule, the average group decision is at around 5.5 on the option spectrum. Group member 1 and 3 appeared to find some common ground in the middle. But if you are informed of other group members' choices, under the unanimity rule, the average group decision moves farther to the right at 7.4. The group decision is now closer to the position of the most extreme member than did under the majority rule. With these findings, do you still take pride in how great your group is because every decision made by your group is unanimous? Another thing to consider as you develop decision rules and procedures is to be aware of conformity effect. It refers to people's tendency to conform to other people and social norms. In Solomon Asch conformity experiment, one participant and several confederates, those who worked with the researchers, were asked which line B, C, D, or E was the same length as A. The correct answer was obviously C. However, when all confederates said that D was the same length as A, the participant had a tendency to abandon their own judgment when faced with disagreement and agreed with the false answer 3/4 of the time. This behavior of deference to group opinion, even when it is blatantly false, is known as conformity. Why do we conform our correct judgment to the group's incorrect one? It is mostly driven by our deep desire to receive social approval. The conformity effect is essential in shaping social norms, which bind people to one another. When your behavior is consistent with a group's social norms, you are considered as part of the group. When your behavior deviates from the group norms, the group members question your commitment and loyalty to the group. Copying other people's behavior is a fast way to build social rapport. Conformity leads to the homogenization of group behavior. On the one hand, the conformity effect helps us make decisions efficiently. It enables us to use context cues to figure out what to do in a new environment. When you travel to a new country where people speak a different language, you rely on observing how other people behave to figure out what you should do. On the other hand, the conformity effect can cloud your judgment and decision making. Conformity requires the group to challenge the basic perceptions and beliefs of the individual who says that X is Y when clearly that is not true. Under those circumstances, we'd like to think we have integrity, and we'd like to believe we would staunchly resist group pressure that is so blatantly wrong. What actually happens when we are confronted with a social reality that conflicts with our own perceptions of the world? It turns out we are more likely to conform to the group norm than stick to our own perception. So here is another reason that you need to think carefully about the decision-making rules about whether you want group members to make their own initial decision independently or ask group members to review their preferences one by one in front of other group members. In collective decision-making, deliberation sometimes does not balance diverse views, but rather generates a group decision that is even more extreme than any option presented before the group discussion. This phenomenon is called group polarization. It means group decision is more extreme than the group members' average initial choice. Group polarization defies the assumption that collective decision-making improves decision quality and generates wisdom of crowds, especially with diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. It is believed that making decisions as a group, especially in a group with members' diverse backgrounds, can push people toward consensus and the middle ground over the decision-making process. However, consistent findings suggest that groups, after discussion and deliberation, often leads to more extreme decisions than those that individuals would have taken on their own. One reason of the group polarization is that once a small number of group members favoring one option reaches the threshold of a tipping point, the rest of the group members quickly fall into line, creating a cascading effect. We will talk more about the information cascading effect next week. Even though groups generally do show pressures toward conformity, the tendency to side with the majority after group discussion turns out to be even stronger than this. Group polarization is especially severe for groups of like-minded people who typically make more extreme decisions as a result of deliberation. If you can remove conformity effect and the problem of group polarization, you may still run into shared information bias in making collective decisions. For a group to make wise decisions and generate wisdom of crowds, it requires the group discusses the information that is most useful to the decision that needs to be made. One difficulty is that groups tend to discuss some types of information more than others. The groups may pay more attention to the information that comes from leaders and the information that is consistent with group norms. The group's discussion is also influenced by the way the relevant information is originally shared among the group members. The problem is that group members tend to discuss information that they all have access to, while ignoring equally important information that is available to only a few of the members. This tendency is called the shared information bias. In an experiment, participants read descriptions of two candidates for a hypothetical association about the presidential election, and then met in groups to discuss and pick the best candidate. The information about the candidates was arranged so that candidate A had more positive qualities overall in comparison with candidate B. If all group members were given the same information about both candidates, the members chose candidate A 83% of the time after their discussion. However, in some cases, the researchers made the task more difficult by creating a hidden profile. In this case, each group member received only part of the information. Although all the information was potentially available to the group, it was necessary that all of the information was properly shared to make the correct decision. Under the condition of hidden profile, the information favoring candidate B was shared, but the information favoring candidate A was not. Only 18% of the groups chose A, whereas the others chose candidate B, which had fewer positive qualities. Even though the group members had access to all of the positive information collectively, the information that was not originally shared among the group members was never discussed. Moreover, the shared information bias occurred even among participants who were given explicit instructions to be sure to avoid expressing their initial preferences and to review all of the available facts. In this video, we learned about wisdom of crowds and madness of crowds. Not all crowds generate wisdom. There are conditions. Under what conditions do crowds generate wisdom, and under what conditions do crowds generate madness? In summary, to generate wisdom of crowds, we need to meet 4 conditions. First, diversity of opinions. Each person should have private information, even if it's just an individual interpretation of the known facts. Make sure you have a wide range of views, preferences, interpretations, thought process, and private information. Second, expertise. In addition to caution against the equality bias, we need to make sure expertise is not blocked by organizational hierarchy. In organizations, it is common that information held by one department is not accessible by another. It is also common that a leader suppresses expertise by not including experts in the collective decision-making process, because the leader wants the committee to make a certain decision. Third, independence. Make sure that people's opinions are not determined by the opinions of those around them. Where choices are visible and made in sequence, an information cascade can take place. Fourth, rules and procedures of aggregating individual preferences to a collective decision. Next week, we'll focus on information cascade.